Starting with news from Russia, Russian court has ordered opposition leader Alexey Navalny to be kept in custody until February 15th. Navalny will remain in a Moscow prison for 30 days. According to Navalny's aides, the decision was made at a hastily organized hearing after his arrest. Meanwhile, after the court's order, Navalny put out a video message where he has urged his supporters to hit the streets and not remain silent.
Our country has become poorer. It is degrading and our education is getting worse. Even our healthcare is getting miserable. And only we can stop this. Therefore, I urge you, do not be silent, resist and take to the streets. If we want to achieve something, we will achieve it.
Russian opposition leader Alexey Navalny was detained shortly after landing in Moscow. The hearing to extend his detention was held at a police station instead of a court. He was denied access to legal representation. The Kremlin critic's lawyer has vowed to file an appeal against his detention both in Russia and at the European Court.
Some things are beyond the boundaries of law practice, and law constantly happened to Alexei. After that, we address the European Court and we get a ruling by the European Court every time that acknowledges the violations made by our courts. I think that this case is no different. When we address the European Court, the ruling will be in our favor.
Meanwhile, the chorus abroad for Navalny's immediate release continues to grow. German Chancellor Angela Merkel decried the arbitrary arrest of Navalny and has demanded his release. Merkel's spokesman said that she condemned the arrest, which violates the principles of the rule of law. The European Commission chief Ursula von der Leyen has joined the international condemnation over Navalny's detention. UK's vaccines minister Nadhim Zahawi has said that the British government is very worried about the well-being and safety of the Kremlin critic.
We are very worried about the well-being and safety of Alexei Navalny. And of course, we have to make sure that the Russian government answers why a poison was used against Alexei Navalny in Russia. The foreign secretary has been leading, I think, the world in terms of, one, being robust on the Magnitsky Act, but also on holding countries that violate so flagrantly human rights. But you'll be hearing more from the Foreign Secretary on this.
The United States has also called out the decision to arrest Alexei Navalny. On the other hand, Lithuania has said that it will ask the European Union to swiftly impose new sanctions on Russia. The Lithuanian foreign minister has said that the neighboring EU countries Latvia and Estonia will also work towards imposition of restrictive measures against Russia. Meanwhile, the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov has dismissed the global outcry. Lavrov said that he has called it a bid by Western countries to deflect attention from the crisis taking place within their own territories.
We can see how the Western countries jumped at yesterday's news about Navalny's return to Russia. And we can see how gladly the comments, which replicate one another, are being done. They are doing so happily, as it looks like the Western politicians view this as an opportunity to draw attention away from the deepest crisis the liberal development model has found itself in.
Navalny is also facing potential new criminal charges. This under a probe launched last year by Russian investigators who say that he misappropriated over $4 million worth of donations. The Russian opposition leader returned to Moscow from Berlin, where he underwent treatment for Novichok poisoning. And now WION correspondent Stuart Smith is joining us live from Moscow. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. What can you tell us about the situation on ground? There is, as we just mentioned, global outcry over his detention.
Global outcry and local outcry. Since Mr. Navalny's detention, there have been protests in Moscow and just outside it, where he's being detained due to the perceived injustice going on by Mr. Navalny's supporters. And that's quite something, because protests of more than one person right now are illegal due to coronavirus legislation. It gives you a sense of the strength of feeling here in Moscow. And looking ahead to the weekend, one of the opposition parties, unrelated to Alexei Navalny, Navalny, but an opposition party nonetheless, has applied for permission to hold a rally of up to 10,000 people. And the weather here is very cold. It's very snowy. For 10,000 people to come out would be quite something, and a real sign of how seriously his supporters are taking things here. But right now, as things stand, Alexey Navalny is in jail. He's not yet been sentenced. He's in detention while that case is worked out. But some very breaking news in the last hour. We've heard there is an additional charge being brought against him. He was originally detained at the airport on this fraud and anti-corruption charge, which you mentioned. Yes. However, he is now also being charged with a libel situation after he made comments about a veteran on a promotional video for constitutional changes in Russia. So fraud charges and now a libel charge, and this libel charge is likely to be heard tomorrow. Very quickly, the wheels of justice moving in Russia against Mr. Navalny.
All right, and as you just mentioned, and we said this earlier as well, that he will remain in Moscow prison for 30 days. So what is exactly the course of action here?
The course of action is to hold him while a case is brought against him. This place is a between stage. It's not a police station holding cell, nor is it a prison. He's being held in solitary confinement in a place designed for 3 people, but he is just by himself. Perhaps one slight upside of the COVID-19 pandemic. He has been visited by an NGO which visits people in custody. He is well. However, he has been struggling to meet his lawyer while in custody. The Russian state will bring these charges against him, will formulate a plan, and then we will see whether he does indeed get charged with breaking these bail conditions. If he is charged with breaking these bail conditions, he can expect a sentence of over 3 years in prison. That will, of course, incite even more anger amongst Alexey Navalny supporters.
All right, and he was also denied access to legal representation, but now his lawyer has vowed to file an appeal against the detention in both Russia and the European court. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so he has now managed to speak to his lawyers. His lawyers say this whole process is very unusual in Russian history. Unprecedented was the phrase they used when a judge was brought into a police station to give a verdict on Alexei Navalny. The Kremlin say this is all above board. This was an emergency situation due to COVID-19, and things are moving very quickly, and they had to react appropriately. The Kremlin says this is following Russian law, and other countries outside of Russia would do well not to try and interfere. They should follow the mechanisms of international law. They should focus on their own domestic issues. They say what's going on here in Russia is entirely above board. He's been charged with various crimes, and the Russian justice system will carry on regardless, denying that any of these charges are politically motivated.
All right, and talking of international law, Lithuania has also said that it will ask the European Union to swiftly impose sanctions. What can we expect in that regard?
Yes, sanctions have been the de facto approach by Western countries to perceived violations of human rights in Russia. The United States and the European Union already have many sanctions against Russian top officials and against the state itself. Jake Sullivan, the incoming national security advisor in the United States, has already decided that sanctions will be levied against whoever is found to be responsible for the cyber attack which happened last month. The US, of course, blames Russia for that. So it seems like sanctions are on their way regardless. This may just provide another reason for Western countries to add more sanctions to that list. However, the Kremlin easily denies this or dismisses this because they believe that Alexei Navalny, or they say they believe Alexei Navalny, is a Western agent, a puppet of either the security services or the governments of Western countries. They would say this is entirely predictable. It's all part of one big plan to try and destabilize the Russian political landscape and to try and build up sanctions and economic leverage over Russia.
All right, Stuart Smith, thank you so much for joining us with all those details. We will continue to track this very closely. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.